At age 4, his father Elias decided Chicago had become too dangerous after 2 local boys killed a policeman in a robbery gone wrong. The neighborhood that had seemed promising would later become the headquarters of notorious gangster Al Capone. Seeking safer surroundings, Elias moved his family to Marceline, Missouri, a small frontier railroad town 100 miles northeast of Kansas City. The Disneys came from a lineage of failed dreamers and schemers. Walt's grandfather, Keppel, had tried drilling for oil without success, then set out for California's goldfields, only to give up before arrival, finally settling for an unprofitable Kansas farm that remained difficult to manage until the very end. Elias seemed destined to repeat this pattern. He bought a small farm in Marceline and worked it hard, making his sons help with all household tasks. Every venture he undertook ended in failure, creating a complex duality in his character. His determination to avoid his father's fate made him extremely diligent and hardworking. But repeated failures despite this diligence left him bitter and angry. Elias was a severe man, described as nearly humorless. Deeply religious, he believed in an old-school approach to parenting that involved corporal punishment, beating his children with a switch, the wooden handle of his hammer, or his bare hands. Though some accounts exaggerate this into tales of brutal beatings, the reality was harsh discipline rather than abuse. No black eyes or broken ribs, but never any outward affection either. Walt's mother Flora provided the counterbalance. She came from a long line of academics and school teachers, from a sort of upper-middle-class American family. Bright and possessed of a wonderful sense of humor, she was loving and affectionate towards her children. She would even sometimes stand up to Elias for the boys, intervening to prevent their punishment when he was angry. It was largely due to Flora's physical and emotional protection that Walt would remember Marceline as an idyllic place, almost a utopia. Roy Disney later said it was just heaven for us city kids, while Walt himself declared, "Everything connected with Marceline was a thrill for us after coming from crowded, smoky Chicago." Walt's wife later pointed out how remarkable this was, noting, "Marceline was the most important part of Walt's life. He didn't live there very long. He lived in Chicago and Kansas City much longer. But there was something about that farm that was very important to him." Marceline was, as Walt's wife noted, like a Disney movie itself, which was no coincidence. The place teemed with life. Farms, gardens, and groves provided fruits and vegetables, while streams and forests harbored all manner of woodland creatures: foxes, rabbits, squirrels, opossums, and raccoons. Walt delighted in the farm animals, often riding the pigs when driving them into their pen. He spent summers fishing for catfish in the creek and winters skating on its frozen surface. The sense of community ran deep. Neighbors would help each other mend fences, and during harvest time, they would sleep in the Disney's front yard for a week while the women cooked together and the men worked the fields with Elias and the boys. Extended family was always present. Aunts, uncles, and cousins lived nearby, while others would often visit, staying with the Disneys for weeks at a time. In Marceline, the seeds of Walt's future artistic vision were planted. His fascination with trains began here, where the railroad represented adventure, technology, and opportunity. Like Thomas Edison before him, he would take a job selling treats to passengers, earning pocket money while feeding his imagination. These trains would later feature prominently in his films, theme parks, and personal obsessions. Another influential figure was his Uncle Ed, considered by most to be dim-witted or even mentally handicapped. To young Walt, however, Ed was simply a kid who never grew up, maintaining an infectious enthusiasm and love of adventure. Uncle Ed would take Walt on excursions, playing games, exploring nature, flagging down trains, and catching rides to neighboring towns. This Peter Pan-like figure would later inspire Walt's storytelling about eternal youth and adventure. The farm itself might have been idyllic, but it wasn't profitable. When Elias came down with either typhoid or diphtheria in 1911, leaving him unable to work, the family was forced to leave Marceline for Kansas City. Walt was 9 years old, and life was about to become much harder. In Kansas City, Elias purchased a newspaper delivery route. His two oldest sons, Herbert and Raymond, were already adults and had left home, but Walt and his older brother Roy remained to work the route. For the next 6 years, Walt would wake at 4:30 every morning to deliver papers, even in the freezing winter. He would later tell stories of trudging through 5-foot snowdrifts to complete his rounds. Elias's meticulous nature turned even newspaper delivery into a demanding ordeal. While other delivery boys simply tossed papers onto porches, the Disney boys were required to place them inside storm doors, even when trudging through feet of fresh snow. This perfectionism would later echo in Walt's own obsessive attention to detail. At school, Walt proved an indifferent student. Exhausted from his pre-dawn paper route, he often slept through class. Even when awake, he showed little interest in studies, preferring to draw and doodle rather than pay attention. However, he found his element in performance, forming a partnership with Walt Pfeiffer at Benton Grammar School. The two, dubbing themselves the Two Bad Walters, created shows, stunts, and jokes, essentially running their own vaudeville act. His entrepreneurial spirit emerged early. He set up a tent circus for neighborhood children, charging a dime for admission, until his mother discovered he was charging and made him refund everyone's money. He constantly devised schemes to sell newspapers on the side and create additional income streams. However, whenever Elias discovered these side hustles, he would confiscate all of Walt's pocket money. The tension between father and son reached its breaking point when Walt was 14. While helping Elias work on the roof, Walt failed to execute one of his father's commands quickly enough. Elias ordered Walt to the basement for punishment, but this time Roy, home for a visit, pulled his younger brother aside and whispered, "Don't take this anymore. You're bigger than him. Don't let him do that to you." When Elias came down to the basement, hammer handle raised, Walt grabbed his father's hand. When Elias raised his other hand, Walt caught that one too. In the ensuing struggle, Elias suddenly realized his son had indeed grown stronger than him. He broke down crying and never attempted to hit Walt again. Throughout these difficult years, Flora continued to shine as Walt's protector and supporter. Like Edison's mother, who educated him, or Napoleon's mother, who drove his ambitions, Flora Disney proved instrumental in nurturing Walt's creative spirit. As biographer Neil Gabler wrote, "It was she who managed the money for Elias, made most of the children's clothes, and sewed their quilts, cooked their meals, and encouraged their reading, connived with the children, and always exercised restraint and an even temper. And it was Flora alone who could tease her husband and calm his raging storms, though she did so carefully without confronting or countermanding him." Walt's fascination with cartooning, which his father dismissed as impractical, began in his earliest childhood. In Kansas City, this interest evolved into an obsession. He was simply always drawing. He took Saturday courses at the Kansas City Art Institute and signed up for correspondence courses, the original distance education. Despite this dedication, Walt was never an exceptional cartoonist. He wasn't naturally gifted at drawing, but through extensive practice and sheer determination, he made himself into a decent artist. In 1917, Elias moved the family back to Chicago, where Walt attended high school. As the school paper's cartoonist, he focused on patriotic cartoons about World War I, continuing his pattern of being an indifferent student, but obsessed with drawing. He would often skip school to visit the Chicago Art Institute or hang around The offices of the Chicago Tribune. The family's return to Chicago was prompted by Elias's interest in the Ozell factory, which produced jellies. The business was struggling, so Elias decided to become personally involved. Walt worked there one summer before quitting to become a substitute mail carrier, a job that nearly ended his life before it truly began. A mail bomb injured 30 and killed 4 in his post office, including a man working just 2 desks away. Walt was covered in debris, but survived what was likely an attack by either organized crime or radical anarchists. During his senior year, Walt decided to leave high school altogether. He attempted to join the army to fight in World War I by forging his birth certificate, but was caught and rejected. Eventually, he succeeded in forging papers to join the Red Cross as an ambulance driver. By the time he reached France, however, the war had ended. He spent his time doing menial labor, and in every spare moment, drawing. He even got his work published in the army newspaper. In one of history's curious coincidences, Walt was stationed in the same ambulance corps as Ray Kroc, the future CEO who would transform McDonald's into a global empire. According to some accounts, Kroc remembered that the other men found Walt strange because he would stay behind drawing while they ventured into French towns to meet girls. In 1919, Walt returned to the United States to find his father had secured him a job paying $25 a week at the Ozell factory, a good salary for the time. Elias was flabbergasted when Walt rejected it, holding out instead for work as an artist. "He never understood me," Walt later said. "He thought I was a black sheep, this nonsense of drawing pictures." He said, "Walter, you're going to make a career of that, are you?" Walt's first real opportunity came through his brother Roy, who recommended him for an apprenticeship at Pesman Rubin Commercial Art Company. At just 17, Walt was thrilled to gain full-time employment as an artist. Though he was laid off during a financial downturn, it wasn't due to poor performance. His colleagues remembered him as a solid artist and an extremely hard worker who completed tasks quickly and well. The most significant outcome of this job was meeting Oop Iwerks, a remarkably gifted cartoonist. The two formed an immediate partnership that played to their complementary strengths. Ub possessed the artistic talent Walt could only dream of, but was shy and socially awkward. Walt, while a decent artist, was charming, extroverted, and a natural salesman. Together, they started their own company, selling basic illustrations to Kansas City businesses. Despite some initial success, they were still just teenagers. When they saw a job advertisement for a cartoonist at the Kansas City Slide Company, Ub suggested Walt take it to provide steady income while he maintained their business. However, Ub's limited business acumen led to the company's closure, and he soon joined Walt at the Slide Company. This marked Walt's introduction to moving pictures, and he was instantly captivated. "The trick of making things move on film is what got me," he would later recall. As biographer Gabler noted, Walt Disney seldom dabbled. Everyone who knew him remarked on his intensity. When something intrigued him, he focused himself entirely, as if it were the only thing that mattered. Animation became his new obsession. Not content with just learning animation at work, Walt transformed his parents' garage into an experimental studio. He set up cameras and animation equipment, spending endless nights exploring different techniques. Roy recalled, "When he'd come home, and long after everybody else was in bed, Walt was out there still puttering away, working away, experimenting, trying this and that, drawing and so on." The timing was crucial. Animated cartoons were barely 20 years old. There were no college degrees in animation. It was the Wild West of entertainment. At the Slide Company, they used cutout cartoons, the standard method, but Walt became fascinated with cell animation. a new technique using overlapping layers of illustrations on celluloid sheets. This allowed animators to keep backgrounds and static elements constant, while only redrawing moving portions, potentially revolutionizing the process. Walt's obsession with cell animation drove him to experiment constantly, talk to experienced animators, attend Art Institute classes, and devour library books on the technique. He began producing cartoons for Kansas City's biggest theater, the Newman Theater. These Newman laugh-o-grams often adapted old fables and fairy tales, while giving life to inanimate objects, like a jumping plant that eerily foreshadowed Pixar's famous lamp decades later. Though the 1 to 2 minute shorts were commercial failures, they made Walt a minor celebrity in Kansas City. He discovered he loved the attention, thriving on audience response. Soon, he dreamed of making longer 7-minute cartoons. He rented a small shack just 18 steps up from his day job at what was now called the Kansas City Film Ad Company. His employers didn't mind his side projects, and Walt's natural gift for inspiration led upcoming animators to work for him for free, drawn by the chance to learn cell animation. Eventually, Walt went all in on his new venture, convincing Ub to join him again in building a full studio. With his brothers recently departed from Kansas City, Walt turned Laugh-O-Gram Studios into a surrogate family. The young, unmarried staff worked from 9 a.m. until midnight, experimenting, playing pranks, and pursuing their craft. When asked if they were making good money, Walt replied, "Frankly, no, but we're having fun." Walt's poor financial management soon pushed Laugh-O-Gram Studios to the brink of bankruptcy. In a desperate move, he attempted a more ambitious project, a 7-minute film combining live action with animation called Alice's Wonderland. While inspired by Lewis Carroll's famous novel, this bore no resemblance to Disney's later Alice in Wonderland. Instead, it followed a real little girl entering a magical animated world. The company was literally crumbling as Walt tried to complete the project. Animators departed one by one. They were evicted from their offices, and even his faithful friend Ub eventually quit. Walt finished the film largely alone, doing most of the animation himself. While others had combined live action and animation before, Walt's approach was revolutionary. Rather than inserting small cartoon elements into live action, he placed a live actress within a predominantly animated world. This innovation, however, couldn't save the company. Walt's financial situation became desperate. Though not extravagant with money, he survived on canned beans, had been evicted from his home, and showered weekly at the train station. The fundamental problem was insufficient revenue. Kansas City simply couldn't support the costs of producing such complex animations, and Walt lacked the connections for broader distribution. Despite the company's failure, Walt maintained his characteristic optimism. "I had no recollection of ever being unhappy in my life," he would later say. "I was happy all the time. I was excited. I was doing things." Yet he also admitted being crushed and heartbroken by his first bankruptcy at age 21. This duality typified Walt's resilience. Setbacks might devastate him briefly, but within days his natural buoyancy would reassert itself. Deciding he needed a fresh start, Walt debated between New York and Los Angeles. He chose Los Angeles, partly because Roy had moved there to recover from tuberculosis, but he was so broke he couldn't afford a train ticket. Undaunted, Walt bought a camera on loan and went door to door in Kansas City's wealthiest neighborhoods, offering to film people's children. His clever hustle raised enough money in just weeks to pay for the camera and his train ticket to LA. When Walt boarded that train, he said he felt free and happy, as if he were lit up inside by incandescent lights. The bankruptcy's bitterness had already faded before his irrepressible optimism and sense of possibility. Though recently burned by the animation industry, Walt initially considered switching to live-action films when he reached Los Angeles. These were the days before Hollywood's golden age, But Los Angeles was rapidly becoming the center of film production. Animation's heart still beat in New York, making LA an unexpected choice for someone hoping to continue in cartoons. Fate intervened when Walt secured a distribution deal for Alice's Wonderland with New York-based distributor Margaret Winkler. This led to the 1923 formation of the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio, the seed that would grow into the Walt Disney Company. The studio began by producing more episodes of the Alice series, which found modest success. Walt brought his old friend Ub Iwerks west to join him and hired several ink artists, including Lillian Bounds, whom he married in 1925. The marriage proved happy and enduring, with Lillian providing steady companionship as they raised 3 children. However, trouble arose when Margaret Winkler married and handed operations to her husband, Charles Mintz. Walt and Mintz clashed immediately over creative control and money. Though they reached a financial agreement when Walt demanded better compensation for his increasingly successful shorts, the core conflict remained. Mintz believed his show business acumen and creative notes were key to their success, while Walt saw himself as the true creative genius. The New Deal actually increased financial pressure on Walt, who was trying to expand his studio and hire more animators to improve quality. The once playful atmosphere of the early Disney company gave way to stress and tension. 3 animators quit to start their own studio, and the situation seemed precarious until Walt developed a new series starring Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Oswald was an immediate sensation. Other animators regarded him as the gold standard because, unlike most cartoon characters who merely served as vessels for gags, Oswald had a consistent personality that carried through from cartoon to cartoon. This success allowed Walt to pressure Mintz for better terms, expand his staff to 22 employees, and build a new home. Just as everything seemed perfect in 1928, Walt faced his greatest catastrophe yet. He traveled to New York to negotiate a new deal with Mintz, confident that Oswald's success gave him leverage. Mintz saw things differently. Since he had negotiated the national distribution deal with Universal Studios and owned the intellectual property rights to Oswald through careful contract work, Mintz believed Walt was merely a dispensable middleman. Disney's animators were doing the actual drawing. Walt himself had stopped actively animating, so Mintz saw him as nothing more than a subcontractor. Without Walt's knowledge, Mintz had secretly negotiated employment contracts directly with Disney's animators. When Walt discovered this betrayal, he called to verify and found it was true. The meeting in New York became an ambush. Not only did Walt fail to get his new deal, but he essentially lost his character, company, and employees in one devastating blow. Mintz treated him rudely, dismissing him as a nobody. According to Ub Iwerks, this was one of the absolute low points in Walt's life. Usually, Walt was very enthusiastic and bubbling and bouncing, no matter what happened, Ub recalled. But he had met a stone wall in the east. On the train ride home, Walt's wife Lillian described him as a roaring lion, fuming about his treacherous crew and Mintz's betrayal. But even in his anger, Walt channeled his emotions into creativity, sketching ideas for a new character to replace Oswald. While the commonly told version suggests Mickey Mouse emerged fully formed during this train ride, Iwerks later revealed that the character evolved through brainstorming sessions between Walt, Roy, and himself. Walt drew some initial Mickey prototypes, but they weren't particularly good. It was Ub who sketched what would become Mickey's first recognizable form. However, everyone, including Ub, agreed that Mickey was truly Walt's creation. He conceived the concept, developed the personality, and as they said, gave Mickey his soul. The creation of Mickey Mouse took place under almost conspiratorial conditions. With only Walt, Roy, and 3 loyal animators, including Ub, remaining, they worked in the same building as the traitors, who were finishing their contracts on existing projects. The faithful few developed Mickey in secret, literally working behind a black curtain to prevent their idea from being stolen. They would work on contracted projects during the day, then stay late into the night to bring Mickey to life. Their first Mickey Mouse animated short, Plain Crazy, showed promise. Test audiences enjoyed it, and distributors expressed interest, but all declined to take it. Their hesitation stemmed largely from Walt's recent falling out with Mintz and the impending departure of his animation team. The legal complications and uncertain future made potential partners nervous. During one screening, sensing another rejection coming, Walt made an impulsive declaration that would change animation history. We're going to make it with sound. The executive's interest was piqued, though people were skeptical about sound cartoons. One executive voiced a common doubt. Drawings are not vocal. Why should a voice come out of a cartoon character? The technical challenges were immense. Sound films were just emerging, and synchronization was crucial. Even a fraction of a second's misalignment could ruin the effect. This challenge was even greater with animation, where every movement had to match perfectly with the soundtrack. But Walt, characteristically undaunted by technical hurdles, convinced his small, dedicated team to tackle this new frontier. The team's enthusiasm for innovation helped overcome their exhaustion from working late nights. When young animator Les Clark developed an ingenious method for syncing recorded sound and animation frame by frame, it seemed they cleared their biggest obstacle. However, they soon faced another challenge: synchronizing the music. Walt traveled to New York, where a new executive, Pat Powers, had arranged for a symphony to record music for their new Mickey Mouse cartoon. The session was a disaster. The symphony couldn't maintain precise timing, wasting an entire afternoon of expensive recording time. The stakes were enormous. The entire company rode on the success of this sound cartoon, now titled Steamboat Willie. They were out of money, deep in debt, and had just wasted precious resources on unusable recordings. Walt's response was characteristic and immediate. He wired Roy to sell his car. The decision wasn't even difficult for him. Though the car sale didn't completely cover costs, Roy managed to secure additional emergency loans. For the second recording attempt, Walt himself, though not an engineer, devised the solution: synchronizing a clack on the audio recording with a bouncing ball on the film, allowing the symphony to maintain exact timing with the animation. When they screened Steamboat Willie for a live audience, the reaction was unprecedented. Iwerks later said, "I never saw such a reaction in an audience in my life. The scheme worked perfectly. The sound itself gave the illusion of something emanating directly from the screen." The audience's enthusiasm led to multiple showings late into the night. When two animators, exhausted after months of work, stepped outside to chat, Walt stormed out and berated them. "You're out here talking about babies, and we were in here making history." Pat Powers helped Disney secure a state-by-state distribution deal, and Steamboat Willie debuted as the first Mickey Mouse cartoon in theaters. It was an immediate sensation. Over the next 2 years, Disney and his animators produced a steady stream of Mickey Mouse cartoons and launched a new series of sound animated shorts called Silly Symphonies. For the first time, Walt experienced sustained success. Mickey Mouse became such a phenomenon that the Queen of England requested private screenings at Buckingham Palace. Theatres sometimes compiled the 7-minute shorts into feature-length shows, and audiences called ahead to confirm Mickey Mouse cartoons would be playing. Despite Mickey's phenomenal success, Walt and Roy weren't getting rich. Walt couldn't bring himself to accumulate wealth. Every cent earned went back into the company to create better animations. He hired more animators, made the animations more elaborate and lifelike, and adopted expensive new Technicolor cinematography for color cartoons. Roy, managing the finances, grew increasingly exasperated. "We've got to quit spending money on these films, or we're going to go broke," he complained. Walt, continually, and without letting up in the least, always strives for something that has not been done. That sort of policy, of course, is always costly. Their financial struggles weren't just due to Walt's perfectionism. He had signed an unfavorable deal with Pat Powers that gave the executive a disproportionate share of the income. Worse, Powers refused to open his books, leading the Disney brothers to suspect they weren't receiving their fair share of earnings. The situation came to a head in a scene eerily reminiscent of the Mintz betrayal. Powers attempted to steal the company from Disney, hiring away his animators, including iWorks. Powers' reasoning mirrored Mintz's. He handled the business and distribution. iWorks drew Mickey Mouse, so why pay Walt Disney? The betrayal hit Walt hard, especially losing iWorks, his faithful friend from the beginning. Up had grown tired of living in Walt's shadow, sharing Powers' view of his own importance as Mickey's actual animator. However, just as Steve Jobs would later prove more vital to Apple's success than Steve Wozniak's technical genius, Walt's vision proved more crucial than iWorks' artistic talent. The new company formed by Powers and iWorks never approached Disney and Mickey's popularity. While the mass exodus that characterized the Mintz betrayal didn't repeat, losing iWorks devastated Walt personally. The emotional toll of iWorks' departure, combined with his wife's miscarriage and mounting work pressure, led Walt to suffer a mental breakdown in 1931. This marked one of the darkest episodes of his life. Recognizing his need to recover, he took an unprecedented 3-month vacation to Panama and Cuba with his wife, completely disconnected from work. The break proved transformative. He returned energized and ready to enter what would become his most productive period. Success followed quickly. In 1932, Walt won his first Oscar for a short cartoon called Flowers and Trees. He claimed another in 1933 for The Three Little Pigs, which marked a crucial evolution in animation storytelling. While most cartoons of the era were simply series of gags, Three Little Pigs featured a meaningful story and characters audiences could identify with. Its musical elements became hits, and the film's success proved addictive to Walt. Inspired by this triumph, Walt made a momentous decision in 1934. Disney Studios would create the world's first feature-length animated film. With approximately 200 employees, they began work on Snow White. Like Steve Jobs abandoning the successful Apple II to pursue the Macintosh, Walt's attention shifted away from Mickey Mouse, the character that made him famous, to focus entirely on this new venture. The production of Snow White tested every limit. Walt predicted it would cost $250,000. Instead, they borrowed that amount from Bank of America, then needed $650,000 more the next year, and another $650,000 the year after. When they requested an additional $327,000, Bank of America finally sent Representative Rosenberg to investigate what was happening with their money. Rosenberg attended a screening of the unfinished film. Some scenes were still sketches, and sat in complete silence. The taciturn banker left without a word, causing Walt to panic and chase him to his car, explaining how much better it would flow when completed. Just before driving away, Rosenberg finally spoke. "That thing is going to make you a hat full of money." From that moment, Disney's relationship with Bank of America was secured. They would write whatever checks the studio needed. The film's escalating costs were matched by endless delays, largely due to Walt's perfectionism. Though no longer an active animator, he demanded excellence in every frame, driving his artists to distraction. Like Steve Jobs, he couldn't always articulate exactly what he wanted changed, but insisted on improvements until each scene met his exacting standards. This perfectionism proved both frustrating and inspiring. While it exhausted his animators, it pushed them to achieve things they hadn't imagined possible. As their December 21st, 1937 release date approached, the studio transformed into a 24/7 operation. Animators worked in 8-hour shifts around the clock, with later shifts filling in animations begun by earlier teams. Walt's perfectionism had delayed them so severely that this frantic pace became necessary. Despite his resistance, he was finally forced to approve some scenes he didn't completely love to meet the deadline. By the end, Snow White had taken years longer than anticipated, and costs had spiraled from $250,000 to more than $1.5 million. Everything hung on its success. If it failed, not just the Disney company, but Walt and Roy personally would be in debt for life. The premiere exceeded their highest hopes. The audience response was unprecedented. They broke into spontaneous applause multiple times throughout the film, even during scenes where nothing spectacular was happening, simply amazed by the technical brilliance of the animation. The film was so ahead of its time that Disney animations wouldn't match its technical quality for decades. Not until the 1980s or even 1990s would the studio consistently achieve comparable animation. Snow White became the biggest hit the world had ever seen, earning more than $6 million in just the first 6 months, making it not just the highest grossing animated film, but the highest grossing feature film of any kind. Theaters required reservations 3 weeks in advance, even for weekday matinees. The film's cultural impact was global, particularly in Europe, making it arguably the most culturally significant movie of all time. Snow White's success transformed Disney Studios completely. The company moved to a new office on Hyperion Street that revolutionized workplace design, essentially creating Google's campus culture 60 years before Google. The studio featured multicolored bricks and various woods to create a friendly atmosphere, beautiful grounds with trees and walkways, a gym, barbershop, ping pong tables, and softball fields. Most remarkably, it offered what might be the greatest company perk in history. Employees could sunbathe nude on the studio roof. The environment attracted the best talent in animation. Disney Studios became the industry's mecca, far outstripping any competitors. The late 1930s represented a golden age for employees. Los Angeles was still booming, but not yet choked with traffic. Hollywood was taking off. Car ownership was becoming ubiquitous, and the United States was emerging as a superpower. Disney employees could afford beautiful houses, and the perfect weather complemented their sense that anything was possible. The work culture resembled a giant fraternity party. Staff played practical jokes, day drank, formed romantic relationships, and played games while maintaining their creative output. But it wasn't just play. Disney emphasized education and craft development, bringing in expert animators to teach new techniques. This combination of fun and serious skill development typified great innovative environments. However, this creative paradise proved short-lived. Disney's next 2 films, Pinocchio and Fantasia, struggled. World War II's outbreak eliminated European ticket sales, dealing a major blow. While critics didn't hate Pinocchio, it failed to meet Snow White's standards. Fantasia received mixed reviews. Some loved its ambitious combination of animation and classical music. Others hated it. Though it would later be recognized as Disney's most ambitious film, it lost money initially. Financial difficulties led to belt tightening, pay cuts, and layoffs. Simultaneously, resentment grew over changes in the studio's culture. Walt, now 39 with 2 daughters, was trying to standardize production processes to create multiple films simultaneously with over 1,000 employees. The fraternal atmosphere gave way to assembly line efficiency, requiring everyone to simply play their assigned role. These tensions erupted into a devastating labor dispute in 1941. Animators formed a picket line that lasted 5 weeks, protesting both the work environment changes and financial cutbacks. The National Labor Relations Board eventually forced Walt into a compromise with labor leaders, but the damage was done. The studio's workforce dropped from 1,200 to 694 employees. Some cuts were necessary cost-saving measures, but many were clearly retribution for striking. The dispute wounded Walt deeply, transforming his personality. Employees noted he became more churlish, angry, and distant, losing his characteristic cheerfulness and optimism. He grew vindictive toward those who crossed him. Walt and Roy blamed the entire conflict on communist infiltrators, with Walt declaring, "We never had any troubles until the commies moved in." Roy agreed. Money was never the basic problem in this thing as much as communism. While easy to dismiss these concerns from our modern perspective, the context was crucial. America was still in the Great Depression. People were disillusioned with capitalism, and communism had a strong presence in the United States, particularly in the labor movement of the 1930s and 40s. Walt and Roy were correct that many strike organizers had communist connections, but they wrongly dismissed legitimate grievances about working conditions and management changes. The studio managed to complete Dumbo and Bambi in 1941 and 1942, respectively. But Walt's passion for animation had been severely dampened. For the rest of the 1940s, he shifted focus to World War II related projects, producing educational and propaganda films for the US military. For the first time in his life, Walt developed outside interests, playing polo, attending social events, and generally disengaging from the company's creative process. The studio did continue work on one feature film throughout the 1940s, Cinderella. Ironically, Walt's reduced involvement didn't hurt its success. The 1950 release became the studio's first major hit in years, effectively saving the company financially. The studio's subsequent films, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, and live-action features like Robin Hood and His Merry Men and Treasure Island all performed well. The studio's success, without his deep involvement, had a strange effect on Walt. While Disney Studios remained profitable, it was no longer the cutting-edge innovator of the industry. Warner Brothers' Looney Tunes was offending, but Walt couldn't muster the enthusiasm to re-engage with animation. Instead, he developed what seemed to many a bizarre obsession: model trains. This wasn't just a casual hobby. In 1948, Walt sold his house specifically to buy a new one, where he could build a miniature train track in his backyard. The train was knee-high, just large enough for Walt to ride around the yard. He converted a shed into a toy train factory, complete with a lathe and drill. His passion expanded from trains to building entire miniature towns around his train stations. The obsession soon infiltrated Disney Studios. Walt commandeered an entire wing to experiment with building toy trains and increasingly elaborate miniature villages. He put people on the payroll specifically to help design and construct these little towns, complete with wind-up toys and mechanical innovations to make the villages come to life. They featured furniture, boats, fake lakes, and entire warehouses of miniature scenes with trains running throughout. Studio executives grew concerned about Walt's mental state, but tried to keep his expensive hobby quiet. While they didn't completely hide it, they certainly didn't advertise that their leader was spending vast sums on what appeared to be an elaborate toy collection. However, Walt's seemingly pointless hobby was actually gestating something revolutionary. He began calling his main village Disneylandia, soon shortened to Disneyland. What started as an idea for a 7-acre park grew into a vision for an entire city. This wasn't just another amusement park with roller coasters and games. Walt envisioned the world's first theme park, an immersive experience that would transport visitors into a different world. Most people couldn't grasp Walt's vision when he described it. To understand their confusion, consider the era. In 1950, many of Walt's contemporaries were old enough to have fought in World War I. Their parents had grown up without cars, using horse and carriage. Yet here was Walt describing a fake town with canals, boats, submarines, and mock spaceships. Concepts that seemed utterly fantastical to people who'd spent their early years using trolleys. Walt's response was characteristic. He simply ignored anyone who couldn't understand his vision. After years of seeming unfocused and unmotivated, his passion roared back to life. He became obsessed with Disneyland, working day and night, completely convinced of its potential despite others' skepticism. Even his closest allies struggled to understand. His brother Roy admitted, "I don't see it clearly yet, but I do think the idea should be considered and studied on its merits. The whole idea to me has great possibilities. In other words, I don't really understand what you're talking about, but it sounds promising, and I trust you, Walt." Walt's approach was forceful and direct. He once walked onto the animation floor, grabbed an animator, and declared, "I want you to work on Disneyland, and you're going to like it." This became his attitude throughout the 1950s. Anybody who couldn't get on board needed to get out of the way. In 1951, Walt returned to his proven formula, assembling a small team of committed geniuses and visionaries to work closely together with maniacal focus. He later reflected, "Damn it, I love it here. It's just like the studio used to be in the years when we were always working on something new." This was the key to Walt's passion. He needed to be constantly innovating, pushing boundaries, creating something unprecedented. Walt secured funding for Disneyland through an innovative deal with ABC Television for a show appropriately titled Disneyland. Though television was in its early days and no one really knew what they were doing, the show became a massive success, generating the capital needed for the park's construction. The park would consist of 5 distinct areas: Main Street USA, Adventureland, Frontierland, Fantasyland, and Tomorrowland. When Walt consulted amusement park experts, they unanimously advised against the project. The industry had peaked decades earlier and was in decline. But Walt remained convinced his concept was different and pressed ahead. Ground broke on Disneyland on July 12, 1954. Walt set an ambitious 1-year deadline for completion, remarkably brief compared to the 5 years spent on Snow White. While he actually met this timeline, the budget was another story. The original estimate of $5 million ballooned to $17 million, more than triple the initial projection. Walt's perfectionism drove much of the cost increase. When a contractor suggested using cut glass instead of stained glass to save money, Walt responded, "The thing that is going to make Disneyland unique and different is the detail. If we lose the detail, we lose it all." In another instance, when executive Mark Davis presented 2 versions of an attraction, expensive and inexpensive, Walt put his hand on Mark's shoulder and declared, "Mark, you and I do not worry about whether anything is cheap or expensive. We only worry if it's good." Opening day, July the 17th, 1955, was somewhat chaotic. Counterfeit tickets flooded the park. While 15,000 tickets were sold, an estimated 28,000 people entered. The asphalt on Main Street became so hot that women's high heels stuck in it. In one memorable incident, Walt himself was stopped by a security guard from accessing a restricted area. When Walt identified himself, the guard replied, "I'm not so sure," prompting Walt to threaten to punch him in the face. Despite opening day chaos, visitors were immediately enchanted. As biographer Neil Gabler explained, while most amusement parks were like Warner Brothers cartoons, noisy, chaotic, bombastic, subversive, where social rules didn't apply, Walt created the opposite. Instead of freedom, Disneyland offered control and order, providing what Gabler called an architecture of reassurance. This was achieved through careful design. Buildings were built at roughly 80% of normal size, though the ratio varied, making everything seem slightly toy-like, friendly, and approachable, rather than intimidating. The effect created a sense of comfort and safety, while still maintaining wonder through castles, spaceships, and other fantastic elements. Critics immediately recognized something revolutionary. One reporter noted that Disneyland was less an amusement park than a state of mind. The New York Times praised how Mr. Disney has tastefully combined some of the pleasantest things of yesterday with the fantasy and dreams of tomorrow. On opening night, as fireworks exploded overhead, Walt's daughter Diane observed she had Never seen a happier man than Walt Disney on that night. The park suited Walt's perfectionist nature better than animation. Unlike films, which were finished products that couldn't be changed after release, Disneyland could be continuously refined. Every day brought new guests, experiencing it for the first time, allowing Walt to endlessly tweak and improve the experience. He practically lived at the park, constantly looking for things to update or perfect. Financially, Disneyland exceeded all expectations. Despite tripling its budget to $17 million, it brought in $24.5 million in its first full year of operation. By 1960, Disneyland accounted for 21% of Disney company revenue, while movies made up 38%, television 28%, and merchandise 13%. By true to form, Walt couldn't rest on his success. By 1959, he began considering a new park, and by 1963, this idea consumed him. Two factors drove this decision. First, the vast majority of Disneyland's visitors came from the western United States, mostly California, while most Americans lived east of the Mississippi. Second, Walt had grown frustrated with Disneyland's surroundings. Developers and speculators had bought up land around Disneyland, erecting hotels, restaurants, and housing with gaudy lights and architecture that Walt found offensive. This development also drove up land prices, making park expansion costly. For someone who needed to control every aspect of the guest experience, watching visitors drive past ugly developments and stay in unapproved hotels was painful. But Walt's new vision went far beyond just another theme park. He wanted to create an actual city where people lived, worked, and raised families. It would feature a monorail, underground streets, and a giant dome to keep out rain. Automatic trash disposal would eliminate noisy garbage trucks. Skyscrapers, homes, schools, and theaters would create a complete, self-contained city. Every detail perfect and futuristic, all designed under Walt's supervision. This dream of building a utopian city placed Walt in interesting company. Throughout history, great leaders had similar aspirations. Alexander the Great with Alexandria, Peter the Great with St. Petersburg, Charlemagne with Aachen, and later Steve Jobs with his Apple campus. There seemed to be something in the nature of visionaries that drove them to design ideal cities. To realize this vision, Walt needed vast amounts of land acquired secretly to prevent speculation. He hired former OSS agents, World War II predecessors to the CIA, to quietly purchase property in central Florida. They acquired an area twice the size of Manhattan, enough room for both a theme park and Walt's planned city. Tragically, Walt's vision for his city of tomorrow would never materialize. On December 15th, 1965, at age 65, Walt Disney died of lung cancer. His lifelong habit of chain smoking had finally caught up with him, though his health had been declining for several years. With his death, the dream of a futuristic city died too. As one writer noted, Walt was the last line of defense against reality. After his passing, that bold vision was replaced by mere practicality. The project that emerged, Walt Disney World, would become enormously successful, but it was a far cry from Walt's original conception. The city of tomorrow was simply too ambitious, too magical, too visionary for anyone else to carry forward. It needed Walt's unique combination of imagination and iron will to push such an audacious project into reality. Walt's life demonstrated the power of vision above all else. He wasn't the world's greatest animator, director, businessman, negotiator, or public speaker. While good at many things, he wasn't truly exceptional at any specific skill. What made him extraordinary was his absolute commitment to a vision that others couldn't see, and his insistence on making that vision real in every detail. As he himself said, "Never chase the money, I always chase the magic." His addiction wasn't to wealth or power, but to that moment when he could show someone something incredible. and see the wonder in their eyes. He transformed not just animation, theme parks, and entertainment, but the very nature of American imagination. Perhaps the most tantalizing question is what might have been if Walt had lived another decade. Could he have realized his dream of a futuristic city? Given his track record of achieving the impossible, from creating the first successful sound cartoon, to producing the first feature-length animation, to building the world's first theme park, it seems unwise to bet against him. Like all his previous ventures, the City of Tomorrow seemed impossibly ambitious, until Walt Disney decided to make it real. Walt Disney's impact resonates far beyond the company that bears his name. More than any other individual, he shaped popular culture over the past 75 years. Even properties later acquired by Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, follow the storytelling conventions and business models he established. His style of optimistic storytelling, his hero's journey framework, and his approach to creative development continue to influence modern media. His success stemmed from several key attributes. First was his unshakable optimism. Though he could experience depression or anger when setbacks occurred, he always bounced back quickly, typically within days. This resilience proved crucial as he hit rock bottom and had to start over multiple times in his career. His charm was legendary, particularly his ability to focus completely on whoever he was speaking with. Like other charismatic figures from Steve Jobs to Napoleon, Bill Clinton, and even Saddam Hussein, Walt had the ability to make people feel like they were the only person in the room. When speaking to someone, he would lock his entire attention on them with an intense stare, a technique that proved remarkably effective at commanding attention and inspiring loyalty. His capacity for obsession was another key to his success. Whether mastering cartooning basics, learning cell animation, or perfecting theme park details, Walt could focus his entire energy on one task or skill with unprecedented intensity. As his brother Roy noted regarding the theme parks, Walt continually and without letting up in the least always strives for something that has not been done. Most importantly, he was willing to risk everything repeatedly for his visions. Unlike many successful people who become protective of their achievements, Walt repeatedly put it all on black, to use a gambling metaphor. Like other transformative figures, Steve Jobs being fired from Apple, Napoleon exiled to Elba, Edison watching his factory burn, Walt understood that reaching the highest levels often required risking everything. His perfectionism shaped not just his creations, but entire industries. The now common obsession with detail in theme parks traced directly to Walt's insistence that if we lose the detail, we lose it all. His belief that we only worry if it's good, rather than cheap or expensive set standards for quality that transformed entertainment. Like Steve Jobs decades later, Walt possessed an almost preternatural ability to see where the future was heading. He recognized the potential of sound in animation, when others claimed drawings are not vocal. He understood television's power, while other movie studios feared it. He saw theme parks' potential, when experts insisted the industry was dying. Most remarkably, he envisioned immersive entertainment experiences decades before virtual reality made such concepts common. His leadership style was equally influential. Though not a great animator himself, he played the orchestra, as he put it, conducting talented individuals to create something greater than the sum of their parts. This proved more valuable than technical skill, as demonstrated when Ub Iwerks, a superior artist, failed to match Disney's success after their split. Walt's story also demonstrates the importance of partnership. Roy Disney's practical business sense balanced Walt's creative ambitions. Their complementary skills, Roy's financial acumen, and Walt's creative vision, created a more powerful combination than either could have achieved alone. Similarly, early creative partners like Uber Iwerks provided crucial technical skills while Walt supplied the vision and drive. The dualities in Walt's character, optimist and perfectionist, visionary and pragmatist, showman and engineer, make him uniquely suited to build an entertainment empire. His ability to balance commercial success with creative innovation set patterns that technology and entertainment companies still follow today. Most importantly, he never lost his capacity for childlike wonder and enthusiasm for new projects. Even in his final years, while building an entertainment empire and battling health issues, he could still become excited about miniature trains and futuristic cities. This enthusiasm, combined with his relentless drive for perfection, created magic that continues to enchant audiences worldwide. In many ways, Walt Disney created the modern world of entertainment. His innovations weren't just creative, but structural. He pioneered vertical integration in media, controlling production, distribution, and merchandising, created the modern entertainment franchise model, and demonstrated how storytelling could transcend any single medium to create immersive experiences. The company he built has become even more dominant than he might have imagined. Through acquisitions of Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, and 21st Century Fox, Disney now controls an unprecedented share of global popular culture. Yet every property they acquire ends up following Walt's fundamental principles: optimistic storytelling, attention to detail, and an emphasis on universal human experiences. What makes Walt's story particularly instructive is that his success didn't stem from any singular exceptional talent. He was, by his own admission, not the best animator, businessman, or showman. Instead, his greatness came from his ability to combine multiple strengths: vision, persistence, charm, obsession with quality, with an unwavering belief in his ideas. When people couldn't understand his vision for Disneyland, he simply ignored them and pressed ahead. When experts said certain things were impossible, he pushed until they became possible. Perhaps most remarkably, Walt never became trapped by his successes. He abandoned Mickey Mouse at its height to pursue feature animation. He left animation's cutting edge to build theme parks. Even after Disneyland's success, he dreamed of building an entire city. Each new venture seemed more ambitious and unlikely than the last. Yet his track record of achieving the impossible made even his most outlandish dreams seem plausible. Had he lived longer, would his city of tomorrow have revolutionized urban living the way his other innovations transformed entertainment? Given his history of proving skeptics wrong, it seems possible. The world lost more than just a great entertainer when Walt Disney died. It lost one of its great dreamers, a man who had an unmatched ability to make the impossible real. His influence extends into the very nature of creativity and innovation. Disney's oft-repeated phrase, "I never chase the money, I always chase the magic," encapsulates a philosophy that has inspired generations of creators. His ability to balance commercial success with uncompromising artistic vision created a template that later visionaries like Steve Jobs would follow. The parallels between Disney and Jobs are particularly striking. Both were obsessed with perfect detail while maintaining a grand vision. Not technically the best in any single area, but excellent at conducting the orchestra. Willing to abandon successful products to chase new innovations, famously difficult perfectionists who drove their teams to achieve the impossible. Masterful at creating anticipation and wonder. Ultimately interested in building utopian environments. Disneyland and Apple Campus. What made Disney uniquely powerful was his addiction, not to wealth or power, but to creating wonder in others' eyes. Every decision, from insisting on stained glass instead of cut glass in Disneyland, to pushing his animators to achieve ever higher standards, served this fundamental drive to create magic. His story carries a crucial lesson for ambitious people. Reaching the highest levels often requires risking everything multiple times. Disney repeatedly went all in on new ventures that seemed impossible. Sound cartoons, feature animation, theme parks, risking bankruptcy and ridicule each time. This willingness to risk everything combined with his obsessive attention to detail and unshakable optimism, allowed him to repeatedly achieve the impossible. Most importantly, Walt Disney proved that the ability to see what others can't and the determination to make that vision real trumps any specific technical skill. His greatest talent wasn't animation or storytelling or business, but the ability to imagine things that didn't exist and then assemble the talent and resources to create them. In doing so, he didn't just build an entertainment empire. He fundamentally changed how humans experience stories and imagine possibilities. The world we live in, where entertainment is immersive and stories transcend any single medium, is Walt Disney's world. We're all still living in it, following paths he charted decades ago.
Dorothy, the Wicked Witch, the Tin Man, Ruby Slippers, Toto, Oz. These are just a handful of the words that have become synonymous with the 1939 classic, The Wizard of Oz. Even if you haven't seen the movie, you're more than likely aware of it on some level through cultural osmosis, as the film has touched virtually every form of entertainment. It's been spoofed countless times, has prominently appeared in theme parks, and led to additional adaptations of the book series it was based on, although some much more disturbing than others. But while the movie is revered as a cinematic masterpiece, it's also infamous for its disastrous production problems, possibly more than any other film in history. From all the failed attempts that came before it, when production had to start over, its 5 different directors, on-set disasters, forever lost footage, you name it. But let's take a deep dive into the making of a movie which somehow, despite the universe clearly working against it, was even produced at all, with the disastrous production history of The Wizard of Oz. Our story begins in the year 1900 with the publication of L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. The book itself had humble beginnings, and was essentially the culmination of made-up fantasy stories the author would tell his children and their friends. However, there was no one singular source of inspiration for these wondrous tales, and if anything was simply the result of his, let's say, diverse career path. This includes his time as a traveling salesman, as an actor, a playwright, a chicken breeder, the owner of a general store, an Axel lubricant vendor, and more. But there are specific influences that tie directly to Oz, such as the fear of a scarecrow in his dreams as a child, and a tin man he constructed during his time as a window shop dresser. Another was his visit to the extravagant 1883 Chicago World's Fair, which would serve as inspiration for the Emerald City. It's also said that the name Oz itself came from a filing cabinet in his office where he worked, with a drawer labeled O through Z. So with the collaboration of an illustrator named W. W. Denslow, L. Frank Baum poured all of his ideas onto paper and let his imagination flow to create The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Now, for those who have never read the original book, let's briefly cover the basic elements of the story with the original illustrations. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz focused on the adventure of Dorothy Gale, who lives on a farm in Kansas with her Auntie Em, Uncle Henry, and her dog Toto. One day she and her house are swept up into a tornado, and she winds up in the magical land of Oz, or more specifically, Munchkin Land. There she meets the Good Witch of the North, who informs her that she set the Munchkins free by killing the Wicked Witch of the East. To Dorothy's shock, it turns out that her house landed right on top of the Munchkins' former evil ruler, and Dorothy is gifted the witch's pair of, in this version, magical silver shoes. With the Munchkins set free, Dorothy's advised to go see the powerful Wizard of Oz in the Emerald City, as he's the only one who can send her back home. So she goes off to see the wizard, but she's never actually told to follow the yellow brick road, only that the road to the Emerald City is paved in yellow brick. In fact, nowhere in the book is it ever called the Yellow Brick Road, just variations of the term. Anyway, as Dorothy travels to the Emerald City, she meets the Scarecrow, who wishes he had a brain, the Tin Man, who wishes he had a heart, and the Cowardly Lion, who wishes for courage. Although in this version the Tin Man's backstory is especially bizarre, which has to do with a munchkin he was once in love with whose mother cursed him to prevent their marriage. He then proceeded to accidentally chop off all of his body parts one by one, which were then replaced by tin from a tinsmith, and is why he wants a heart, to be able to love again. Anyway, they all decide to join Dorothy in going to see the wonderful Wizard of Oz, and have a few perilous side adventures along the way. Now, oddly enough, in the original version, the Emerald City isn't actually green. It turns out that the city is so incredibly bright due to its brilliance that everybody who lives there has to wear green-tinted spectacles, otherwise they'd go blind. The group of outsiders then meet with the Wizard of Oz individually, where he takes on different forms such as a floating head, a ferocious beast, and a beautiful woman. Eventually they're told he'll grant their wishes if, and only if, they kill the Wicked Witch of the West, the last remaining Wicked Witch in the land of Oz. This is when the witch makes her first appearance in the book, well over halfway through, and sends her flying monkeys to capture Dorothy and her friends. However, within just a few pages when she's held captive at the witch's castle, Dorothy accidentally throws a bucket of water at the witch, which causes the Wicked Witch to melt before her very eyes. Now in this version it's established that the witch's flying monkeys are good guys, but bound by a golden cap with magical powers, which grants 3 wishes to whoever puts it on. So after Dorothy defeats the Wicked Witch, she uses her first wish to be taken back to the Emerald City, where the group hopes to be rewarded by the wizard. Unfortunately, they discover that the Wizard of Oz is a fraud, and is simply a guy who came to Oz by way of a hot air balloon, and was able to convince its citizens he was a powerful wizard. But he still gives the companions a special token to represent their desires, and each item imbues them with the intelligence, heart, and courage they had all along. Oz then decides to take Dorothy with him back home. That is until Toto causes the ropes to break and he is forced to leave her behind. After that, there's another sort of mini-adventure, which leaves the Scarecrow as the ruler of Oz, the Cowardly Lion as the king of the forest, and the Tin Man in charge of another mystical land. But long story short, Dorothy uses her last 2 monkey wishes to travel to Glenda the Good Witch's castle, where she's told that she had the power to go back home the entire time. It just takes 3 clicks of her silver slippers, which she does, and arrives back to Kansas safe and sound. Unless you go by the horrifying 1985 adaptation where Dorothy is forced into a mental institution to undergo electroshock therapy due to her insistence that Oz was a real place.
Will it hurt?
But no. It just manages electrical current.
Now before going further, let's address the elephant in the room. L. Frank Baum held some truly repulsive beliefs about the treatment and lives of indigenous peoples. He expressed and gave these opinions within 2 editorials in 1890 and again in 1891, both of which surfaced in the 1990s. As you can imagine, it was a troubling discovery for those who celebrated the author's legacy, as his contribution to children's literature and fantasy is nothing short of profound. So it's critical that we acknowledge the important statements he made within his personal life, but also allow ourselves to be able to discuss the Oz works and adaptations on their own merit. That said, when The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was published in the year 1900, it was an immediate success, and was the best-selling children's book for 2 years straight. This in turn led to an interest in the live-action adaptation of the story, and its first iteration was an elaborate stage play. L. Frank Baum wrote the script, which was a very faithful retelling of his book, and wound up selling it to the manager of the Chicago Grand Opera House. Unfortunately for the author, the director assigned to the play did not like the script, as he felt it was lacking the spectacle for a proper theater show. So major changes were made to the characters, story, and overall plot, which was done against the wishes of L. Frank Baum. For example, Toto the cute and cuddly dog was replaced by Imogen the cow. It was also made into a musical, with mature jokes and themes to better appeal to older patrons and adults. In fact, aside from the 3 main characters and using a mythical land called Oz, there's almost more differences than similarities when compared to the book. It also featured the most terrifying iteration of the Tin Man and Scarecrow imaginable, and I apologize in advance for them inevitably haunting your dreams. Anyway, the stage play opened in 1902 as simply The Wizard of Oz, and despite the criticisms from author L. Frank Baum regarding all the changes, it was a massive success. Its initial run was such a hit that The Wizard of Oz played on Broadway in 1903, and would tour nationally for another 6 years after that. But as far